When your picturesque gardens on the South Georgia coast, overlooking a salt marsh, are hit year after year by hurricanes, what do you do? In our case, we looked for a piece of property farther inland, away from the salt marshes and away from the threatening hurricanes. We looked for property farther inland. Our search took us a little over 70 miles inland, where we found 10 acres on a lake. This property was basically a blank slate for gardening, with a few mature oak trees, areas of shade around the oaks, and areas of sun. We began planning our new gardens. Having a new garden is a new opportunity and also some new challenges. With such a large piece of property, we had to decide where to begin. We had shade trees, we have open pasture areas with pasture grass, and we have a lake with some wetlands near the lake. We garden now on about 4 acres of the 10, and we are enjoying planning, planting, and piddling in our new South Georgia gardens.
Hi, I'm Belinda, and this is my husband Mark.
Welcome to Winter's Haven and Gardens.
Our new South Georgia garden sits just north of Statesboro and just south of the community of Hope You Like It. We bought the property in the fall of 2022, moved in October, and in November we began our first garden, the Bird Girl Garden, underneath the shade of a large oak in our front yard. In November of 2022, we laid out a butterfly garden over our drain field. We didn't realize at the time, but it turned out to be in the shape of a butterfly with a path running through the middle and wings on each side. We've enjoyed watching wildlife in our pollinator garden from our front porch. Of course, there are butterflies, moths, dragonflies, various pollinators that visit that butterfly garden. But the most enjoyable probably had to be when we spotted a flock of Canadian geese visiting our lake and feeding on the dried seed heads of the wildflowers. We have geese here year-round. They increase in the fall, and they enjoy getting some energy from these dried seed heads. So we will keep our butterfly garden, not just for the butterflies and the pollinators, but also for our guests from the north, as they visit the sunny south and feed on the seeds of the wildflowers in our butterfly pollinator geese garden. In January of 2023, we created the berm. It's a small berm, but it's a privacy area, a living fence along our property line between us and our neighbor. We planted some shrubs and some trees, mostly evergreen, and they provide a beautiful place along our property line that separates us from our neighbor and provides a place for us to enjoy. We needed a place to store our garden tools and our equipment, so we had a barn built. And in April of 2023, we created garden beds around our newly constructed barn. We've planted that area. We've outlined it with logs from pine trees. We also found down on the dam, which is part of our property, some old pine stumps, fat lighter stumps, If you're from the South, especially from Georgia, you know what a fat lighter stump is. So there at the end of our newly constructed barn, we have some fat lighter stumps. We planted a few shrubs around the border, just inside those pine logs that we put out. We have a couple of shrubs, larger shrubs in there, some tea olives, and we scatter wildflowers in there. It's kind of a wildflower perennial area. It attracts butterflies and bees. We enjoy watching the wildlife there around our newly created barn and what Belinda calls our Barney gardens. During the same time that the barn was being constructed, we laid out our new fountain garden just off the front porch. We used a fountain that we brought with us from our last house and some benches. We planted some perennials along with some annuals. We planted 2 urns and added 3 chase trees to the fountain garden. We had gardened while we were working, but we were looking forward to the day of retiring and spending the time together in our gardens, playing in the dirt, piddling in the gardens, creating new garden beds, and we were doing that. While planning and planting, laying out our back gardens, Hurricane Ida came through and blew a large oak over toward the lake. We thought, what are we going to do? Actually, I did. Belinda said, leave the tree there. Let's make it garden art. So then we looked up and found out about hugelkultur and created the fallen tree garden. We planted roses and vines to grow along the fallen tree, decorating it as a piece of garden art. Then we set our sights on an area next to the fallen tree garden, the woodland garden. The woodland garden would provide part shade, at least in the afternoon, from the intense South Georgia heat. We planted some japonicas in this area, japonica camellias, and some hydrangeas, lacecap, and mophead. But we also added some other structures such as crepe myrtles that will grow and get large and provide more shade. On the edge of the lake, we placed a bench and planted some crepe myrtles for a lake bench garden area. We couldn't get too close to the water's edge because even though it's not a tidal marsh, during times of heavy rain, the water does rise into a boggy area right along the lake's edge. In the fall of 2024, we were hit by Hurricane Debbie and then Hurricane Helene. Helene shook our gardens like a child shaking an Etch-a-Sketch and caused us to go back to a blank slate again. Trees fell on our house, fell on fences, uprooted gardens, and caused us to take a step back and say, what are we going to do now? We called a contractor who began work on the house, rebuilding it, and we began to rebuild our gardens. We had to learn to be resilient as our plants were also being resilient. So we watched, we waited, we planted, we pruned, we piddled in the garden while work was being done on our house. And we became very hopeful for the future. 2025 brought a fresh season of hope to our South Georgia gardens. Plants awakened and began to grow. The stump from the uprooted tree that fell on our house was placed back in its crater. This is now our miracle garden, full of thankfulness, life, and possibilities. Roses began to bloom. The rose Belinda's dream put forth a glorious display that spring. The fallen tree garden burst into a colorful display with roses. Peggy Martin showing why she is the hurricane rose, having survived Katrina in New Orleans and now Helene in our South Georgia garden. The woodland garden burst forth in growth, blooming, and just showing why gardens are so resilient if the gardener will stay resilient. Yes, we'd lost some plants, but some plants had survived. Many of our japonica camellias were lost. Some were able to survive in the shade of other plants, and we found that new plants could take the place of ones that were lost. Spring also showed beauty and hope throughout our garden. In the fountain garden, the vitex or chase tree burst into bloom. Zinnias and guara shared the garden. As the year progressed, mountain daisies and clerodendron Java glory bower burst into bloom. Our fountain garden is also full of other favorites, Mexican sage, pagoda plant, which is also a clerodendron, bat-face kufia, blue of ovulus, sunshine ligustrum. And along the front of the porch, we have some continuous blooming azaleas, along with reseeding vincas and marigolds that came back from last year. As you can see there's some lemon coral sedum. We use it the way Janie does to line walkways and paths. The Bird Girl garden has changed. It's enlarged, and it also now has garden art in the form of the logs from the large oak that fell there, the limbs of the oak providing edging. There's an eagle's nest that we created on the stump of that large oak as garden art. It's mahonia growing around that eagle's nest, some plumbago, hot lips salvia, and lantana spilling out over the edging of the garden. We added some barberries to this garden as well. They're small, but they'll fill in. We have our pink guara putting on a display. And behind the pink guara is the newly planted little gem magnolia. It won't provide the shade that large oak did, but it has provided some magnolia blooms and will continue to do so as it fills in and grows. Our nandinas have come back and are showing some color. We've added some Florida sunshine ligustrum in this garden, one of our favorite staple plants. There's a new vitex growing between those two oak logs there. And surrounding Bird Girl are zinnias and vincas that have come back, reseeded from last year. Behind our boy and girl at the end of this garden, plumbago is blooming. along with candy corn spirea. Our privacy berm continues to grow and develop with its crepe myrtles, Carolina sapphire, Arizona cypress, and our evergreen shrubs expanding and growing.
As fall arrived, we were in awe as we viewed the changes that had taken place in our gardens. Even though we had to be out of our house for 9 months, we didn't stop restoring our gardens. And little surprises appeared throughout the gardens to welcome us in like old friends. We planted lots of perennials and shrubs that can thrive in the sun in South Georgia. We also planted some trees along with 2 live oaks that we hope will bring some shade to our landscape. We are counting our blessings that we were not harmed by the hurricanes. The damage to our house has been repaired, and our gardens are thriving now. We are extremely grateful to be playing in the dirt and piddling around our home once again.
Cheers!
And happy gardening from our South Georgia garden.